The scent of gunpowder still clung to Wade Vance's clothes as he stared at the freshly dug grave on the hill overlooking his ranch. 3 years had passed since he buried his wife and unborn child, but some mornings, like today, the pain felt as raw as the day he lost them. He'd been a different man, then hopeful, loving, open to the possibilities life offered. Now, at 32, he was nothing but calloused hands, a weathered face, and a heart turned to stone. Wade adjusted his worn Stetson against the harsh New Mexico Territory sun of 1879. The drought had been merciless this summer, turning the once green pastures of his modest cattle ranch into stretches of dusty brown. Much like his soul, he thought bitterly. "Come on, boy," he whistled to his loyal border collie Rusty. "Cattle ain't gonna feed themselves." As they walked back toward the weathered two-story farmhouse his father had built with his own hands, Wade noticed a new plume of smoke rising from the neighboring property. The old Wilson place had stood empty for nearly a year after the elderly couple moved east to live with their daughter. Wade had grown accustomed to the silence, to having no neighbors for miles. He preferred it that way. But 3 days ago, a wagon had arrived, followed by another. New neighbors. Wade had deliberately kept his distance, ignoring the activity next door. Whoever they were, they'd learned soon enough that Wade Vance wasn't one for social calls or barn raisings or any of those neighborly customs folks out here seemed to cherish. The morning routine was sacred to Wade: feed the cattle, check the fences, tend to the few crops he managed to keep alive, care for his 3 horses. It was honest work that left little time for dwelling on what could have been. By midday, with sweat soaking through his cotton shirt, he returned to the house for a simple meal of beans and cornbread. That's when he saw it. A cloth-covered basket sat on his porch step. Wade approached it cautiously, as if it might contain a rattlesnake. Rusty sniffed at it eagerly. Pulling back the checkered cloth, Wade discovered a perfectly baked loaf of bread, still warm to the touch, and a folded piece of paper tucked beside it. His fingers, rough from years of ranch work, fumbled with the delicate paper as he unfolded it. "Welcome to a new neighbor. Sometimes fresh bread makes a hard day better. Faith Evans." Wade stared at the elegant script. Faith Evans. Must be the new arrival at the Wilson place. He almost crumpled the note, almost tossed the bread into the yard for the birds. Instead, he found himself carrying the basket inside, placing it on his kitchen table, and staring at it as if it were some strange artifact from a foreign land. He hadn't received a gift from anyone in 3 years. Hadn't wanted one. "Don't get any ideas," he told Rusty, who was eyeing the bread hopefully. "This doesn't change anything." But that night, as he sliced into the soft, aromatic loaf, something stirred in him, a distant memory of shared meals and laughter. He pushed it away as quickly as it came, but the bread was undeniably good, better than anything he'd made for himself in years. The next morning, Wade found himself glancing toward the Wilson property more often than necessary. From his vantage point on the eastern pasture, he could make out a slender figure hanging laundry on a line. A boy of perhaps 5 or 6 ran circles around her, clearly full of more energy than the vast New Mexico landscape could contain. Wade turned away, focusing on mending the fence that had come loose during the last windstorm. But his thoughts kept drifting to the bread, to the note, to the woman named Faith who had extended a hand he wasn't ready to take. 3 days passed, and Wade had nearly convinced himself to forget about the unexpected gift when he spotted her on the road that connected their properties. She was struggling with a wagon wheel that had come loose, her son standing nearby looking worried. Wade watched for longer than he should have, telling himself someone else would come along to help. But the road to town was rarely traveled, and the sun was mercilessly high. Cursing under his breath, he mounted his horse and rode toward them. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat as he approached. "Seems you've got some trouble." Faith Evans looked up, shielding her eyes against the sun. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps 26 or 27, with warm brown eyes and hair the color of honey tucked mostly under a bonnet. Her face was flushed from exertion, but she smiled at the sight of him. "You must be Mr. Vance," she said. "I was beginning to think you were a figment of the townspeople's imagination." "Wade," he corrected, dismounting. "Wheels come clean off the axle." "So I've discovered," she said with a slight laugh that caught him off guard. "I'm afraid wagon repair wasn't covered in my finishing school curriculum." Wade knelt to examine the damage, conscious of the boy watching his every move with wide, curious eyes. "I'm William," the child announced proudly. "But everyone calls me Will. I'm 5 3/4." Wade nodded awkwardly. "That's quite an age." Faith rested her hand gently on her son's shoulder. "Will, why don't you collect some of those wildflowers over there while Mr. Vance helps us?" As the boy scampered off, Faith turned to Wade. "Thank you for stopping. I know you keep to yourself. The people in town speak of you as if you're some kind of myth, the reclusive rancher who never comes to town except for supplies." Wade focused on the wheel, uncomfortable with her directness. "I'm just a man trying to run a ranch, madam. Nothing mythical about it." "Faith, please," she corrected. "And I know something about myths. According to town gossip, I'm the mysterious widow who's either fabulously wealthy or running from the law." She smiled again, revealing a small dimple in her right cheek. "Neither is true, of course." Wade worked in silence for a few minutes, leveraging the wheel back onto the axle and securing it. "The bread was good," he said finally, not looking at her. "Thank you. You're welcome. It's my grandmother's recipe. She always said bread was a peace offering and a promise wrapped in one." Faith smoothed her simple blue dress. "I know how it feels to want solitude, Mr. Vance. I respect that. But where I come from, neighbors look out for each other, especially out here where everything is trying to kill you: the heat, the land, the occasional bandit." For the first time, Wade looked directly at her face. Really looked. Beyond her physical beauty, which was considerable, there was something in her eyes. A familiar shadow. This woman knew loss. "Where are you from?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. "Missouri originally. Then St. Louis with my husband. After he passed last year, I decided we needed a fresh start." She glanced at Will, who was proudly gathering a bouquet of scraggly desert flowers. "Somewhere we could breathe." Wade nodded, understanding more than he wanted to. "Well, the wheel should hold until you get to town. But you might want to have the blacksmith take a proper look." "Thank you. Perhaps I could repay you with dinner?" At his alarmed expression, she quickly added, "Just neighborly gratitude. Nothing more." "That's not necessary," Wade said stiffly, already retreating to his horse. "Good day, Mrs. Evans." As he rode away, he could feel her eyes on his back. Something about Faith Evans unsettled him deeply, and it wasn't just her beauty or her kindness. It was the way she'd looked at him, like she could see straight through the walls he'd so carefully constructed. That night, as a summer storm rolled across the territory, bringing the rare blessing of rain, Wade found himself standing on his porch, watching the lightning illuminate the distant mountains. And for the first time in years, his thoughts weren't on the past, but on a woman with honey-colored hair and knowing eyes. The rain brought more than temporary relief from the drought. It softened the hard-packed earth enough for Wade to plow a new section of field, and it seemed to soften something within him as well. When a second basket appeared on his porch a week later, this time containing a loaf of bread, a jar of preserved peaches, and another note, he didn't resist the small smile that tugged at his lips. "The rain made me think of new beginnings. Will and I are planting a vegetable garden on Sunday after church, should you find yourself with idle hands." Faith, he didn't go. Of course he didn't. But he watched from the distance as Faith and her son worked the soil of what had once been Martha Wilson's prized garden. The boys' laughter carried on the wind, and even from afar, Wade could see Faith's shoulders shake with her own amusement at whatever her son had said. That night, he dreamed of Sarah for the first time in months. His wife didn't appear as she had in his nightmares, pale and still in their bed, the life bleeding out of her along with their unborn child. Instead, she stood in their kitchen, her pregnant belly round under her apron, her face glowing with health. "It's time, Wade," she said simply. "Time for what?" he asked. But dream Sarah only smiled and turned away, leaving him with an ache that followed him into waking. 2 days later, Wade spotted Will alone on the road, riding a too-big pony and looking terrified as the animal trotted faster than the boy could handle. Without hesitation, Wade galloped toward them, catching up to the runaway pony and grabbing its reins just as Will was about to tumble off. "Whoa there," Wade said, steadying both pony and boy. "You all right, son?" Will's eyes were wide, his small chest heaving. "Yes, sir." Butterscotch got scared by a rabbit. He's not usually so jumpy. Wade helped the boy sit properly in the saddle, adjusting his grip on the reins. A good horseman always keeps control, even when he's scared too. Want me to show you how? For the next hour, Wade taught Will the basics of horsemanship, surprised by the boy's eagerness to learn and his lack of fear despite the earlier scare. By the time they rode back toward the Evans property, Will was sitting tall in his saddle, beaming with pride. Faith was waiting at the fence line, her face tight with worry until she saw them approach. Relief flooded her features, followed quickly by something Wade couldn't quite name. William James Evans. What have I told you about riding alone? She scolded, though there was more fear than anger in her voice. I'm sorry, Mama, Will said, suddenly contrite. But Mr. Vance taught me how to ride proper. I can show you. Faith looked at Wade, her expression softening. Thank you for bringing him home safely. Wade dismounted, feeling strangely nervous under her gaze. He's a natural rider. Just needs some guidance. Perhaps you could teach him properly? Faith suggested. I'd pay you, of course. No need for payment, Wade said quickly. I could. Stop by a few times a week. If it would help. The smile that bloomed on Faith's face made something flutter in Wade's chest, a sensation so foreign he almost didn't recognize it as hope. We'd be grateful, she said. And perhaps you'd stay for supper afterward? I make a passable stew. This time, Wade didn't refuse. The lessons became a routine. 3 times a week, Wade would finish his ranch work early and ride over to the Evans place. Will proved to be an apt pupil, soaking up Wade's knowledge of horses like parched earth absorbs rain. And afterward, there was always a meal, simple but delicious food served at Faith's worn oak table, with conversation that grew easier with each passing week. Wade learned that Faith had been a schoolteacher before her marriage to James Evans, a promising young lawyer whose life was cut short by typhoid fever. He learned that Will had his father's quick mind and his mother's stubborn streak. And he learned that Faith was rebuilding her life piece by piece, determined to make a home in this harsh land for her son's sake. In turn, Wade found himself sharing bits of his own story, how his father had claimed this land when Wade was just a boy, how they'd built the ranch together, how he'd met Sarah in town one day and known immediately she was the one. He still couldn't speak of her death, of the hemorrhage that took her and their unborn daughter, but Faith never pressed. As summer faded into autumn, the territory painted in golds and reds, Wade realized with a start that he'd begun to look forward to his visits to the Evans homestead. More troubling, he'd begun to watch the clock on days he knew he'd see Faith, to take extra care with his appearance, to notice the way the changing light played in her hair or the sound of her laugh when Will said something precocious. You're smitten with her, old Doc Henderson observed one day when Wade reluctantly visited town for supplies. Don't know what you're talking about, Wade muttered, selecting new horseshoes with unnecessary concentration. The widow Evans, Doc persisted, his rheumy eyes twinkling. Half the unmarried men in the county have come down with mysterious ailments just to visit my surgery since she started helping out 3 days a week. Wade's head snapped up. She works for you. Best assistant I've ever had. Smart as a whip and gentle with the patients. Doc stroked his white beard thoughtfully. She mentioned you've been teaching her boy to ride. Said you have a way with him. Wade paid for his supplies and left without responding, but the doctor's words followed him home. Was he smitten? The very idea seemed a betrayal of Sarah's memory. And yet, he couldn't deny the lightness he felt in Faith's presence, the way his day seemed brighter when he saw her smile. That night, as the first autumn chill settled over his lonely house, Wade took out the small wooden box he kept hidden in his dresser drawer. Inside were the few mementos he had of Sarah, her wedding ring, a lock of her dark hair, the letter she'd written him when he'd gone to Albuquerque on business just a month before her death. My dearest Wade, it began. The baby kicked so strongly today, I swear she's going to be a horse rider like her papa. Wade's vision blurred as he read the familiar words. For the first time, though, the knife-sharp pain was accompanied by something else, a gentle ache, like an old wound finally beginning to heal. What would you think of them, Sarah? He whispered into the empty room. The widow and her boy? The answer came not in words, but in a feeling of warmth that spread through his chest as he remembered Sarah's most frequent admonition. Life's too short not to love with your whole heart, Wade Vance. The next day, Wade arrived at the Evans homestead with a gift, a small, hand-carved wooden horse for Will, and, more significantly, a proposal for Faith. The winter's coming, he said as they watched while practicing his riding in the corral. Your roof needs work before the snow, and that west wall of the barn won't stand up to the winds. Faith nodded, concern creasing her brow. I've been saving to hire someone from town, but let me help, Wade interrupted. I've got the skills and the lumber. No sense in paying someone else. Faith studied him for a long moment. Why, Mr. Vance? I do believe you're becoming neighborly. There was teasing in her tone, but something else too, a warmth that made Wade's collar feel suddenly tight. Maybe I am, he admitted. Is that such a bad thing? Her smile was answer enough. The roof repairs took longer than necessary, partly because Will insisted on helping, which mostly involved handing Wade the wrong tools, and partly because Wade found himself distracted by Faith moving about her daily chores below. The way she hummed while hanging laundry, the graceful efficiency of her movements as she tended her garden, the gentle patience she showed Will when teaching him his letters in the evening, all of it fascinated Wade in a way he hadn't expected. One evening, as October painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Wade was finishing the last section of roof when he heard Faith call up to him. Supper's ready when you are, and I've made apple pie. Wade climbed down the ladder, brushing sawdust from his clothes. The smell of fresh pie made his stomach growl appreciatively. Didn't know you had apples. Faith's eyes twinkled mischievously. Mrs. Larson from town traded them for help with her rheumatism. Being the doctor's assistant has its advantages. The kitchen was warm and inviting, the table set for three. Will was already seated, fidgeting impatiently. Mr. Vance, Mama says after supper you might tell me a story about when you were a cowboy driving cattle, the boy said hopefully. Wade glanced at Faith, who shrugged apologetically. I may have mentioned your cattle driving days to entertain him. Well, Wade said, settling into his chair, I suppose I could tell you about the time we had to move 500 head through Comanche territory. Will's eyes grew wide as Wade recounted a somewhat sanitized version of a cattle drive from his younger days. Faith listened too, her chin resting on her hand, a small smile playing at her lips. After Will was tucked into bed, Faith invited Wade to sit on the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. She handed him a cup of coffee and settled beside him on the porch step, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used. Thank you, she said softly. For the roof, for the stories, for being kind to Will. He's never had a man to look up to since James died. Wade stared into his coffee. He's a good boy. You've done well with him. I've tried. Faith's voice held a note of uncertainty he'd never heard before. Sometimes I wonder if I was selfish, bringing him out here. Life would be easier in the city. Easier, maybe. Better. Wade shook his head. Out here he can grow up free. Learn to be strong. Faith turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. Like you. The question hung between them, weighted with meaning. Wade found himself telling her things he'd never spoken aloud, how he'd almost given up after Sarah died, how the land and the work had been the only things keeping him tethered to this world, how lonely the nights had been. I thought if I kept everyone away, it wouldn't hurt again, he admitted. But that's not living. It's just waiting. Faith's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers warm against his calloused palm. Waiting for what? Wade looked at her, then really looked and saw not just her beauty, but her strength, her kindness, her own hard-won wisdom born of loss. I didn't know, he said honestly. Until recently. Their first kiss was gentle, hesitant, a question asked and answered beneath the vast New Mexico sky. When Faith pulled away, her eyes were shining with unshed tears. Wade, she whispered, I never expected to feel this way again. After James, I thought that part of me was finished. Wade brushed a strand of hair from her face, marveling at the softness of her skin. I know. God, I know. The confession of feelings didn't immediately erase the complications. There were moments when guilt ambushed Wade, when he'd find himself laughing at something Faith said and suddenly remember Sarah, or when Will would look up at him with such trust that Wade feared he could never be worthy of it. There were days when Faith seemed to retreat into herself, perhaps wrestling with her own ghosts. But there were more good days than bad. As November brought the first dusting of snow to the territory, Wade found himself spending most evenings at the Evans home. He taught Will to whittle, showed Faith how to repair fence posts, and discovered the simple joy of being part of something again, a family, or at least the beginnings of one. The town noticed, of course. Gossip traveled faster than telegraph messages in these parts. Some approved. About time Vance rejoined the living, old Doc Henderson declared. Others were less charitable, particularly the unmarried men who had set their sights on the pretty widow. One such man was Thomas Blackwood, the bank manager's son, who'd made his interest in Faith clear from the moment she'd arrived. When he encountered Wade and Faith together at the general store one Saturday, his jealousy was palpable. "Mrs. Evans," he greeted, tipping his hat while pointedly ignoring Wade. "You're looking lovely as ever. I was hoping you might accompany me to the harvest social next weekend." Faith's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on Wade's arm. "That's very kind, Mr. Blackwood, but I've already agreed to attend with Mr. Vance." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I wasn't aware." "How fortunate for you both." As he walked away, Faith exhaled slowly. "That man makes my skin crawl. He's been pursuing me since I arrived, despite my clear lack of interest." Wade frowned. "Has he bothered you?" "Nothing I can't handle," Faith assured him, though I hadn't actually planned to attend the harvest social. Wade found himself smiling. "Well, it seems we are now. If you'd like to go, that is." The harvest social marked Wade's first public appearance as Faith's suitor. As they walked into the town hall, decorated with corn husks and autumn leaves, conversations paused and heads turned. Wade felt a moment of panic, of wanting to retreat to the safety of his isolated ranch. Then Faith slipped her hand into his, and Will bounded ahead excitedly, and Wade remembered why he was here. The evening passed in a blur of introductions, dancing, and more genuine laughter than Wade had experienced in years. Faith was radiant in a simple burgundy dress, her hair arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck. When they danced, Wade was acutely aware of the warmth of her waist beneath his hand, of how perfectly she fit against him. "People are staring," Faith murmured as they moved across the floor. "Let them," Wade replied, surprising himself with his lack of concern. "They're just jealous I'm dancing with the prettiest woman here." Faith's laugh was like music. My, Mr. Vance. Are you flirting with me?" "Trying to," he admitted with a wry smile. "I'm out of practice." Later, as they walked home under a canopy of stars, Will asleep in Wade's arms, Faith asked the question that had been building between them. "What are we doing, Wade?" He knew what she meant. They'd been circling something profound for weeks now, drawing closer but never quite naming it. "I'm falling in love with you," he said simply, the words feeling both terrifying and right. "With both of you. And I don't know if I deserve it, or if I'm ready, but it's happening anyway." Faith stopped walking, her eyes searching his face in the moonlight. "Are you sure? Because Will and I were a package. And opening your heart again after losing someone. It's the bravest, scariest thing in the world." Wade shifted Will's sleeping form gently in his arms. "I know about package deals, and I know about fear. What I don't know is if I can promise to never get scared, to never doubt. But I can promise to try every day to be worthy of the chance you're giving me." Faith reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "That's all any of us can do, isn't it? Try our best each day." The winter of 1879 was harsh by New Mexico standards. Snow piled in drifts against the sides of buildings, and bitter winds howled across the plains. But inside the Evans home, which had increasingly become Wade's home, too, warmth prevailed. Christmas brought Wade's first real test. As the holiday approached, memories of past Christmases with Sarah threatened to overwhelm him. For 3 years, he'd ignored the day entirely, working as if it were any other. But Will's excitement was infectious, and Faith's determination to create a joyful celebration was unwavering. "We'll cut a juniper tree," she declared one evening as they sat by the fire, "and decorate it with popcorn strings and paper stars. Will's been working on a special gift for you," she added with a conspiratorial whisper. Wade swallowed hard. "I haven't celebrated Christmas since, I know," Faith said softly, taking his hand. "Neither have Will and I, not properly, since James died. But perhaps it's time we both create new memories while honoring the old ones." On Christmas Eve, as Will finally succumbed to sleep after hours of excited anticipation, Wade presented Faith with a small box. Inside was a silver locket he'd purchased on his last trip to Albuquerque, a considerable expense for a cautious rancher. "It's beautiful," Faith breathed, opening the locket to find it empty. "I thought," Wade said hesitantly. That maybe someday it could hold a picture of our family, if you'd want that. Faith's eyes filled with tears. Are you asking what I think you're asking, Wade Vance? Not yet, he said honestly. I want to do this right. But I'm asking if you might consider it, when I'm ready to ask properly. Faith's answer was a kiss that left no doubt about her feelings. Christmas morning brought the chaos and joy of Will's excitement, a feast that Faith had been preparing for days, and a handmade gift from Will, a drawing of Wade, Faith, and himself standing in front of a house that was clearly a combination of both their homes. That's us, Will explained seriously, when we all live together. Wade met Faith's eyes over the boy's head, seeing in them the same mixture of amusement and tender emotion he felt. It's perfect, Wade told Will. The best gift I've ever received. January brought a new challenge. Thomas Blackwood, still smarting from Faith's rejection, began spreading rumors that Wade was courting Faith for the money she'd inherited from her husband. It's ridiculous, Faith fumed when she heard. Anyone who knows you would never believe it. But the whispers persisted, and Wade found himself the recipient of cold shoulders and suspicious glances when he visited town. The situation came to a head when Blackwood confronted Wade outside the saloon one frosty evening. I'm just looking out for the widow's interests, Blackwood insisted, his breath clouding in the cold air. Everyone knows you've been struggling to keep that ranch afloat. A man might see marriage to a wealthy widow as an easy solution. Wade's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Mrs. Evans's financial situation is none of your business. Neither is our relationship. Blackwood smirked. Hit a nerve, did I? What would your dear departed wife think of you chasing another woman's money so soon after? Wade's first punch caught Blackwood squarely in the jaw, sending him sprawling into the muddy street. The second never landed, as several men rushed to separate them. That's enough, Sheriff Miller barked, pushing between them. Blackwood, go home and sober up. Vance, I expected better from you. Wade's knuckles throbbed as he rode home, shame and anger warring within him. He hadn't brawled like that since he was a hot-headed youth, and he'd never resorted to violence over a woman. But Blackwood's invocation of Sarah's memory had snapped something inside him. Faith was waiting on his porch when he arrived, her expression a mixture of concern and exasperation. I heard what happened. Wade dismounted wearily. News travels fast. Doc Henderson sent word. He thought I should know before the gossips twisted it further. Faith took his bruised hand gently in hers, examining the damage. Was it worth it? Wade sighed. No. Yes. I don't know. He said things about Sarah, implied I was only interested in your money. Faith's expression softened. Wade, I'm a widow with a young son living alone in the territory. I've heard worse rumors since breakfast. She led him inside, sitting him at the kitchen table while she prepared a basin of warm water for his hand. What bothers me is that you let him provoke you. I know, Wade admitted. I lost my temper. But hearing him talk about Sarah like that, using her memory to imply I'm some kind of fortune hunter. Faith knelt before him, taking his injured hand and carefully cleaning the split knuckles. Wade, look at me. When he met her gaze, she continued. I know who you are. Will knows who you are. The people who matter know the truth. The rest, she shrugged. They'll talk regardless. As she tended to his hand, Wade realized with sudden clarity that he was ready. Ready to move forward. Ready to embrace this second chance at happiness. Ready to become the man Faith and Will deserved. Marry me, he said abruptly. Faith's hand stilled. What? Marry me, Wade repeated, more gently this time. Not because of Blackwood or the gossip or anything else. Marry me because I love you. Because I love Will. Because I want to build a life with you both. Faith's eyes filled with tears. Wade Vance, is this your idea of a proper proposal? With bloody knuckles at my kitchen table? Wade laughed, the tension of the evening dissolving. It's not very romantic, is it? I could try again with flowers and poetry if you prefer. No, Faith said, rising to sit in his lap, her arms circling his neck. This is perfectly us. Unexpected and a little messy. Is that a yes? Wade asked, hardly daring to hope. Yes, Faith whispered against his lips. Yes, I'll marry you. They were married in the spring of 1880, when the desert bloomed with wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. The ceremony was small, held in the meadow between their two properties with only close friends in attendance. Will stood proudly at Wade's side, wearing a new suit and an enormous smile. "Do you think they're watching?" Faith asked softly as they danced under the stars at their wedding celebration. "Sarah and James?" Wade glanced up at the vast, star-filled sky. "Yes," he said with certainty. "And I think they're glad we found each other." That summer, they began building a new house larger than either of their existing homes, situated on the border between their properties, a physical manifestation of their joined lives. Wade sold off part of his herd to pay for lumber and hired men, while Faith contributed her savings and her talent for design. "Are you happy?" Wade asked her one evening as they sat on the partially constructed porch of their new home, watching will chase fireflies in the twilight. Faith leaned her head against his shoulder. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again. Are you?" Wade considered the question, thinking of the journey that had brought him here from the depths of grief to this moment of contentment. "I am, and grateful for the bread that started it all." Faith laughed. "My grandmother always said the way to a man's heart was through his stomach." "Smart woman," Wade acknowledged. "But it wasn't just the bread. It was the note, the kindness when I least deserved it." "You deserved it," Faith said firmly. "You just didn't know it yet." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Wade wrapped his arm around Faith's shoulders, drawing her closer. Will, tired from his exertions, climbed onto Wade's lap, resting his head against the rancher's chest with the easy trust of a child who feels completely safe. In that moment, Wade knew with absolute certainty that this was what Sarah had meant in his dream. It was time to fully embrace this second chance, this new family, this love that had found him when he'd stopped looking for it. The man who had sworn off love, who had retreated into isolation and grief, was gone. In his place sat Wade Vance, husband, father, a man with an open heart and a future as vast and promising as the New Mexico sky above them. And it had all begun with a loaf of bread and a simple note from the widow next door.